Hello, welcome to CrossCurrents, produced by the City of Fort Collins in cooperation with the Larimer County League of Women Voters. I'm Nancy Crow, the moderator of today's program. Our topic is, what are Proposition 101 and Amendments 60 and 61? By Tuesday, November 2nd, Colorado voters will be asked to vote yes or no on these ballot issues. Proposition 101 reduces or eliminates various taxes and fees on income, vehicles, and telecommunication services. State income taxes would be reduced from 4.63% to 3.5% over time. It would reduce or eliminate fees and taxes on vehicle purchases, leases, and registrations. Proposition 101 will also eliminate all state and local taxes and fees on telecommunications services, except for 911 services. The financial impact will be smaller in the first year and will grow in size over the next 15 to 20 years. A Colorado household with an income of $55,000 could expect to save just over $700 when the proposal is fully implemented. In the first year, the tax and fee reductions are expected to be $1.4 billion, $744 million in state reductions, and $629 million in local government reductions. Once fully implemented, the impact is expected to be $2.9 billion in today's dollars, $1.9 billion in state reductions, and $1 billion in local government reductions. Amendment 60 changes several aspects of Colorado's property tax system to reduce property taxes paid by individuals and businesses to school districts, counties, special districts, cities, and towns. The measure phases in a reduction in school district property taxes over 10 years and requires that the reduced revenues be replaced with state funding. In addition, the amendment would repeal current voter-approved measures to retain property tax revenues above Tabor limits. It will also mandate that any future voter measures to increase taxes expires in 4 years. The Colorado Legislative Council estimates that the final property tax reduction for school districts will increase the state budget for K-12 education by $1.5 billion. An average homeowner will pay $376 less, and an average commercial business will pay $5,106 less in property taxes annually. Amendment 61 places new restrictions on government borrowing. Currently, the state and local governments borrow money to build or improve public facilities like roads, buildings, and airports, and repay the money over multiple years. Borrowing is also used for other purposes, such as financing loans for small businesses. Beginning in 2011, Amendment 61 prohibits all future borrowing by state government and limits future borrowing by local governments, including cities, counties, school districts, special districts, and enterprises. The measure also requires that governments lower tax rates after borrowed money is fully repaid, even if the borrowing was repaid from a source other than taxes. Ultimately, you, the voters, will decide. But to discuss the issues in more detail, we have on my right Carol Hedges, Senior Fiscal Policy Analyst for the Colorado Fiscal Policy Institute. And on her right is Greg Goliansky, spokesperson for and Vice Chairman of the Colorado Union of Taxpayers. Welcome to you both, and to our studio and our viewing audiences. Before we begin, is there anything either of you would like to add to the summary of Proposal 101 that I made?
I think you did a good job.
Okay. Greg, why do you think Proposition 101 was placed on the ballot?
Well, Proposition 101 was placed on the ballot for several reasons. I'd like to point out that the description you gave of Proposition 101 came from this legislative council at Colorado Legislature, and that's not entirely accurate description of it. They make several erroneous assumptions in our opinion. For example, they assume that the state budget will not grow, and in some areas they seem to imply that the impact will be, will take place in first year, which is not the case. It will take 10 or more years. Now, why it was put on the ballot? In part, it was put on the ballot because of certain abuses of taxpayers by Governor Ritter and Democrat-dominated legislature, as well as Colorado Supreme Court. I'm referring specifically to something called fester tracks. Governor Ritter and Democrat-dominated legislature was unwilling to ask voters for a vote on the increase in the taxes on automobile registration, so they simply renamed taxes into fees. And they said, well, it's fees, not taxes. Tabor does not follow them. It does not fall under Tabor, therefore, we don't have to have people vote on it. Another reason is elimination of telecommunication taxes. Telecommunication taxes were originally instituted in order to bring telephone service to rural areas, where it was very difficult, therefore, to bring telephone poles, put the copper wires there. It was decided that more dense areas, such as cities, will subsidize rural areas. Today, most people in rural areas use cell phones. Cell phones operate from cell towers, which are placed by private companies, and therefore there is no longer any justification for this subsidy. And in the end, the reduction in income tax, in our opinion, will benefit economic activity in Colorado, which is, as you all know, is in deep trouble all over the country. And we feel that at least in Colorado, this would have, reduction in taxes would have a beneficial effect.
Okay, Carol, would you like to respond to the same question?
Well, it's a little hard for me to speculate as to the intent of the folks who put the ballot initiative on the table or started it through the process, and certainly it's difficult to speculate on the backers, because since we're not exactly sure, other than the Colorado Union of Taxpayers, who exactly is supporting and paying for, certainly for signature gathering and other issues. But, I think I generally agree with Greg that the reason that, one of the reasons 101 is on the ballot is that people are frustrated by the fact that we have a crumbling transportation system, a transportation system that has 128 bridges that are, have been determined to be structurally deficient, and that we have now 52% of our roads that are either, decided to be either, or determined to be either poor or mediocre. And we couldn't figure out a way to pay for those in the typical way that we have in the past through a gasoline tax, because it was very clear in the middle of a difficult economic times that voters weren't going to be very supportive of increasing their gas tax, particularly at that time when gasoline was about $4 a gallon. And the legislature did what the Tabor Amendment, which is supported by many Coloradans, said that they could do, and that is use a different structure, and that's a fee structure, to pay for providing safe transportation systems. And I think that's what we elected officials to do, but I think it upset some people, and I think that the fear of, the anger over increased registration fees had a lot to do with 101. I think, however, the other piece, and I think Greg touched on this, and I think it's really important, there's a philosophy, I think, behind 101 that says government is for those who can pay, and it's not for others. And the idea that telecommunications or telephones in rural areas are all now cell phones is fascinating to me. I would be interested.
Mostly cell phones.
I would be really interested, to talk to folks who live in rural areas. I was just traveling in rural Colorado frequently, and my cell phone didn't work at all. And so, but I do think that it really is very much a philosophy. It is a philosophy that says we don't want one group of folks, i.e., in the case that Greg laid out, citizens in concentrated population areas, helping out or contributing to the benefit of folks who live in other areas. I do think that's a philosophy behind a lot of this.
Well, that's not exactly the case. We are not saying we shouldn't help people who need help. We're just saying that with the advance of technology of telecommunication, the copper wires, telephone lines are probably going to replace what horse was in the day of Model T. This is the technology of yesterday, and it is going away. And there is no point of building any more stables when you need garages for automobiles. So we're not saying we're against helping people who need help. We're just saying let's not throw money into something that belongs in the museum.
Well, and I would agree with that as well. I just think that if we look at what that money, the telecommunications dollars, are being used for today, it is actually to subsidize telephone service, not only to individuals in rural areas, but also individuals who are visually and hearing impaired. It has transformed from a project where we're building copper wire. We haven't laid copper wire for telephones for a long time. It has transformed as the public sector has seen the need change. And needed to help folks who, as a community, we feel deserve our assistance.
Okay. Greg, those of you supporting Proposition 101 see a need for tax relief for citizens of Colorado. Yet Colorado ranks near the bottom in the nation in combined state and local taxes collections per $1,000 of income. What makes Colorado unique in the amount of tax dollars needed to sustain public services?
Roads are obviously important and needs to be maintained. However, it does not necessarily mean that they are being maintained efficiently right now. By definition, government is incapable of doing anything efficiently because efficiency is a function of desire for profit maximization. That's why private sector is efficient and government sector is never efficient. I mean, there could be all sorts of good intention on the part of the government, but they're never efficient because no bureaucrat ever have incentive to do things well. For example, take public schools. I'm sure there are great many good teachers in public schools, but fundamentally, the fact is that whether a pupil from a public school ends up at Harvard or in the Skid Row, the pay of a teacher will not change. Therefore, there could not possibly be any efficiency there. So perhaps in order to maintain roads better, government should perhaps outsource that to private industry, merely hiring some private company, letting them do the job competitively, and that will cut down on the amount of needed taxes for that. The subject of making government more efficient is such a huge subject. There are so many things that can be done that we're probably going to have to spend here a couple of days and not just 1 hour.
Carol?
Well, to answer directly your question, I think that Colorado isn't unique in its need to have a well-funded and well-supported public sector to be the foundation for the private sector economy that Greg is so enamored with. And I think that it is something for people to recognize is that we do tax ourselves less here. Whether you look at just state taxes or you look at a combination of state and local taxes. And I think that to some extent that's consistent with our philosophy as Westerners. But I think the other thing that's so important about this discussion in 101 is that we also believe that our children all should be educated. And it shouldn't make any difference where they grow up or what kind, the socioeconomic status of their parents, and that they should have access to good public education, and that we should have access to clean air and clean water, and we should have access to safe transportation systems. And those are all the things that we get, and we are trying to get in Colorado through a system that isn't terribly well financed. I want to touch just a minute on efficiency because I like efficient government too. I think it's
It's a fantasy. There's no efficient government.
Well, and I think that pretty much sums up the differences between people who are concerned about the impact of 101 and the proponents of 101. To say that the only thing that moves efficiency is profit motive is pretty inconsistent, I think, with the philosophy of many of us, and that I actually believe that Colorado state government and many other governments do things well and do things not so well, just like the public sector does things well, and even with a profit motive, sometimes do things inefficiently and not so well.
If I could just, could I just make a quick point?
Sure.
First of all, when things are not going well in the private sector, people get punished. They become bankrupt. When things do not go well in the government, it goes on forever. My second point is, I think Carol put, as they say, a cart before the horse, because it's not the government that is foundation for private sector. It's the private sector that is foundation for the government, because government is essentially nothing more than a form of consumption, and you cannot consume something until you produce it. And it's only that private sector that manufactures, produces wealth that we all use and government uses as well.
And I'm sorry, but I have to go back to one of my favorite authors, and that's Adam Smith. And he's sort of the founder and the designer of our free market economy. And, you know, it's interesting because he would disagree a little bit. He actually says that when you create a private market, you must create a system to deal with the inefficiencies in the places where the market will not allocate goods and services effectively. And that is, in effect, what the public sector is all about. And the notion, and I'd really like listeners to think about the idea that the private sector is wholly responsible for the well-being of our communities, because I think that it would be difficult for those businesses to maintain their own roads and make sure that our air is clean and make sure that our wildlife population is well managed. But because that is very difficult for the private sector to do, and those are the things that really we build our economy on here in Colorado, that's where the public sector plays a role.
We're going to take a break here and see if there's any questions from the studio audience.
Mel Hilgenberg, Fort Collins. My question, I'm an educator by background, and education, your comment about things being underfunded. My question for the two of you is, what are we going to do in light of the fact that the economy is so sour right now to be able to have sufficient revenue to keep funding roads, schools, et cetera?
Well, one thing I can say is that, and I think we would both agree with this, is that these measures, 101, 60, and 61, will not result in more resources being available to invest in the public sector.
I'm afraid we will not agree with that.
So if we don't agree, then what Greg is saying is he actually likes public investments, but he just has a different philosophy about how you maximize those. And I want us to hold that thought just a little bit. I mean, I think the idea is that somehow if you cut taxes, you raise tax revenue. But that doesn't fundamentally change the very point that we must have dollars to invest in schools. We must have dollars to invest in innovation through our public our higher education system. We must have dollars to maintain a transportation system. And I think that in Colorado, we as voters get to decide what we want to do to increase the number of dollars that are coming in. But I can just say with great confidence that 60, 61, and 101 are not going to go in the direction of putting more dollars into the public sector, but in fact will go the other way and reduce dramatically the money available for public investments.
I couldn't disagree more. The entire history of the United States, and let's not go very far. Let's go to the 20th century. Every time that there was a dramatic decline in taxes, it produced a tremendous economic booms. We could go back to, for example, President Coolidge and President Harding after World War I. Taxes was dropped from something like 70% to 7%, and it produced a tremendous economic boom known as the Roaring Twenties. President Truman cut taxes after World War II, created this economic boom of the 50s. President Kennedy, President Reagan, they all cut taxes, producing tremendous economic booms. So when taxes are decreased, it stimulates the private wealth-creating economy that stimulated and expanded private economy generate far greater amount in taxes and that will fund all the needed public services. If you keep increasing taxes, you are killing the goose that lays the golden eggs, and if a high level of taxation was a good thing and government investment was the only thing that make things run well in society, then Soviet Union or North Korea would have been land of opportunities, and we know this is not the case.
Well, I just think it's fascinating when we compare a state in the United States that has the second to the lowest tax rates of any state in the country, and we're now talking about comparing it to a dictatorial, directed economy in North Korea and the Soviet Union. Nobody is arguing that we need to have a directed economy. But what we are suggesting, and what I am suggesting, and quite frankly, what I think most Coloradans believe, is we do need to make common community investments so that we can fund our schools, our roads, our healthcare system, our transportation systems, and our environmental systems. And what these proposals do is take money away from those activities and undermine the very foundation upon which our business community, of course, it's not the only thing that makes the economy work, but it's pretty darn tough to sell goods and services without an education system or effective transportation system.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question here.
Thank you. Bill Jerky from LaSalle, Colorado. Just a quick question regarding 101. I understand the theories on Reaganomics and espouse them as well, but I guess I'm curious, when we wipe out the license plate tax revenue from $150, $200 down to $10 or less per plate, and we wipe out literally hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, I just wonder where the replacement funds come to keep city and county roads and bridges intact. That is a tremendous reduction, and I can't go out and buy enough cars to Reaganomics that thing so that there's equal revenue as to what there was before.
Well, may I start this one? Well, 2 points. Number one, it costs government $4 to register an automobile. Therefore, $10 should be more than sufficient to cover registration. Now, if you want to use funds for something else on the table, government have to ask for that, okay? You can't just simply say, well, we're gonna make you pay for alleged registration, and then we will use it the way we want it to. Furthermore, renaming taxes into fee just to raise them and go around Tabor is illegal. When government takes money illegally, that is called theft. And it makes no difference whether it's done by Governor Ritter and Supreme Court Justice Malarkey or whether it's done by Bonnie and Clyde. Theft is theft, and it cannot be allowed to stand. And in November 2nd, we will make sure that it will not stand. If government wants money, under the law, they have to ask for it. If they simply take it, that will not be allowed to continue.
Carol?
I'm deeply troubled by a situation in which the rule of law is so ignored. In our democracy, we may not agree with the opinions of our court, but they are the law. And to say that they are illegal after the Supreme Court has determined it is the law of the state is actually kind of shocking to me. It's disrespectful in a way that is really troubling to me. There's a lot of things that happen in state government that I don't agree with, and in Washington that I don't agree with. But to say that my interpretation determines what's legal and what's not legal is so inconsistent with our rule of law in this country, it's surprising to me. But let me go beyond that. The Tabor Amendment very clearly distinguishes between taxes and fees. It goes back to something that I started with. The very philosophy of the Tabor Amendment is that we should have fee-based government, that we should collect money for a specific purpose from a specific group of people and use it for that specific purpose and nothing else. And don't be mistaken here. That's exactly what those registration fees are used for. They are collected from people who register their car, and they are legally and consistently used only for the support of the roadways. And to come up with a different interpretation and to say that that's illegal is beyond pale for me. It is Greg's idea that it is illegal, but to suggest that the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court and the governor are thieves because they are not consistent with an individual philosophy, I think is beyond the pale.
Can you briefly respond, because we need to move on to
I
Amendment
think
60.
Carol is confusing the rule of law with the rule of lawyers. And the rule of lawyers is what we have right here. The color of the Constitution is quite clear that any expansion of taxes have to be approved by the vote of the people. Simply renaming fees into taxes doesn't make them fees. It's still taxes, still coming out of our wallets. Furthermore, we have to also remember that registration fees, the government only needs $4 to register a car. When you pay $100 or $200 for registration, that's not for registration. That is misuse of funds for something else, and that is illegal. And yes, our Colorado state government have engaged in illegal activities with connivance of the Colorado Supreme Court.
Amendment 60 requires that school districts phase out 1/2 of their 2011 property tax rates by 2020. It invalidates past local voter-approved retention of property tax revenue in excess of Tabor limits. The state must make up the lost revenues. Greg, in your opinion, does this constitute a loss of local control of education?
No. The local control of education primarily deals with the subject of what is being taught, and that will still remain in the hands of local school boards. The only thing that will change is that the state will have to backfill the funds which will be, the reduction in real estate tax will cause. Now, under Colorado Constitution, it is said that state of Colorado will provide free and uniform education to all the students in our state. And if the state is to provide that education, therefore, we think that states should pay for it.
Carol, you have a response to that?
I do think that control does come a great deal of times with dollars. We've seen a dramatic movement of funding for K-12 education away from local governments and property tax bases to the more income redistribution components of the income tax and the sales tax. In other words, in 1998 or in the mid-90s, about 60% of funding for schools came from the local property tax base and 40% from the state. That has absolutely reversed in the last few years, where now state government is paying for about 63% of all public education, and local property taxes are paying for a much significant, about the other 37%. I think absolutely this will lead to less local control, but what is more disturbing to me than that notion in terms of the dollars is the idea that communities all across the state, in fact, in 97% of the school districts across the state, local voters have gone to the ballot and said, we would like to keep property taxes that we collect and reinvest them in our schools. And it is about letting voters in Boulder decide what they want to do, and let the voters in Fort Collins, in Mancos, in Durango, in La Junta decide for themselves what they want to do. But what this measure does, what 60 does, is it simply on a statewide vote wipes away all of that local decision making and forces us to start again, to impose upon ourselves an additional set of elections, even though voters have consistently, by community, decided that they want to keep the property taxes that they collect. And I think that maybe is the most interesting and sort of inconsistent with philosophy component of Amendment 60. I think the idea that we're going to get rid of local property taxes and somehow be able to make them up by state investments that we just have talked about that we are going to reduce significantly because of a Proposition 101 is also leads to the conclusion that that's not going to happen, so our schools are going to have less money. But this idea that voters statewide are going to tell voters in individual communities how they finance their schools is something that I find particularly troublesome, particularly because of the philosophy we have here in the state of Colorado that we are very much a local control school state.
I understand that, but there is a problem with how do you interpret Constitution, which says uniform and free. Obviously, we do not have uniform standards in the state, and the only way, in our opinion, to get this accomplished is to make sure that state backfills everything that needs to be so that it will equalize the funding all over the state. The actual educational decisions, what is to be taught, how it is to be taught, will still remain within local school boards. This is just a financial arrangement.
It's interesting to me that the position, and I guess it must be the position of the Colorado Union of Taxpayers, is that we have common curricula, that we have state-determined curricula, because that's not really where we are. That's an interesting position, but I think that we have to be realistic that to a great extent, and again, my issue is not so much on the control of the dollars as it is the idea that you're just wiping away 15 years of local elections and having voters in one community telling voters in another community how it is that they are supposed to be funding and how much they get to invest in their own schools.
Thank you. Carol, a provision of Amendment 60 requires that government-run companies and authorities pay property taxes. Why are they exempt now?
They're exempt now because they are providing a basic public function, and if you are paying taxes for a public function, then the users of that public function, if they pay taxes, when they pay the fees to consume that service, will then be paying taxes again. And it's interesting because this whole notion of an enterprise is a creation of the Tabor Amendment. Enterprises didn't exist before 1992 and the adoption of the Tabor Amendment. They were created tax-free in Tabor to say if you have an activity that can be financed on a fee-for-service basis, there's going to be a certain set of rules that all other parts of government apply to all parts of other parts of government won't apply to enterprises. And so this idea of now taxing them is interesting because, one, it's taxing public dollar that's supported by a public investment, which is interesting. But secondly, it's just going to mean that we're going back to that fee-based government again. You limit the spread of who pays for these basic public services to a limited group of people, and those costs to those individuals is going to go up. And I think that the example that I want to help people understand here in Fort Collins is the university, the Colorado State University, is an enterprise. Colorado State University, if Amendment 60 passes, will be paying property taxes on its the value of its holdings. There's only one way that money will be made up, and that will be through increased tuition and fees to students and parents. And in Colorado, we and students and parents already pay a relatively high percent of the cost of educating our kids. We have chosen over time not to spread that among a bunch of us, among the entire community, and this just takes us farther in that direction.
Great. Are there benefits to these taxing the enterprises
Well,
and authorities?
obviously there are benefits. What public function is provided by a public golf course when you can have a private golf course? What public function is provided by a public ice rink when you can have a private ice rink? Exercise facilities. A number of assets that government control and directly compete with private enterprises make that competition, to say the least, unfair, because government enterprises, such as, for example, golf courses, and private golf courses are not competing on a level playing field because government enterprise does not pay taxes and usually often is subsidized. So that is not fair. Furthermore, other government so-called enterprises, they get police protection, they get fire protection, they get all the government services for nothing, while their competitors have to subsidize them. In fact, all of us have to subsidize them. So Why don't we create an environment where people who are using these facilities are paying for them?
Well, first of all, I didn't know that recreation facilities were considered enterprises or authorities
They
in the
certainly are.
definition. You know, you're going to have to
Certainly are.
help me with that, because a recreation department is not an enterprise or an authority that would be subject. They're functions of a local government, and this doesn't apply to them. Most of the enterprises and authorities are things like the Division of Wildlife, the university system, the Denver Water Authority, the Colorado Housing and Finance Authority, some pest management authorities. I'm not sure that the authority. I'd love to know which
We actually
authorities.
looked into that, and there are a great many of these exercise facilities, recreation facilities, public golf courses operate as enterprises.
And so what the philosophy is that as those things are not public recreation facilities, are not public goods.
The philosophy is
Interesting.
if they compete against private companies that are engaged in same business.
Why
there
doesn't the
should-
amendment say that rather than what it does say?
Well, I think it say that quite clearly.
No, I don't think
No.
there's anybody competing with the Denver Water Authority to provide water to the city of Denver, and they're the biggest, probably going to be the biggest new property taxpayer of any of them in the state.
We're going to take a break again and go to our studio audience.
And a not-so-serious question, have you all played a whack-a-mole game in a Chuck E. Cheese restaurant? Because education...
Just a few times.
Because education is
I think I missed that part.
funding, well, education funding is a whack-a-mole game. My question for you has to do with the fact as public school funding, what our state constitution says is we are to provide gratuitous education to all children ages 5 through 21. Okay, assuming that 60 does not pass, what are your thoughts in terms of what's going to have to be done? Because people do get an opportunity to vote on property tax, both for operating funds as well as for bond issues for capital construction. And since they're not getting to vote on fees/taxes, there's, I think, going to be a revolt in spite of local control, in spite of that likely to continue with people voting on those and probably defeating them in the future.
I'm not sure what we're going to do to face the financing of public education problem. I think that we will be dealing with that today and tomorrow and probably for the next 20 years. I think that our public education system, I think, is facing real challenges as we attempt to compete in a world market. And I think that communities are going to be addressing that issue through tax measures, through education reform measures over time. I don't know exactly where we're going to go. What I do know is that taking away 50% or $1.5 billion in funding for the system is not going to move that debate about reform and improvement very far down the road. Even if you accept for a moment that the state government has the resources to come in and backfill the dollars that are going to be left locally, that are going to be taken away from the system, we will be taking away other resources that help support those schools, because state government isn't going to have the resources to fund the other kinds of important activities like higher education, where our teachers are educated, transportation and human services and healthcare activities. The bottom line with 60, 61, and 101 is it reduces dramatically the amount of money available to invest in our communities, and most importantly in education. And rather than moving the debate along about what we do to improve the system, it takes us backwards.
Thank you.
We don't think it's $1.5 billion. We think $1.5 billion spread over 10 years, so that's about $150 million a year in a budget that is projected to be next year $20 billion, hardly the end of the world. We also think that public education is due for some serious reforms. There's a report by Cato Institute in Washington, D.C., that in last 40 years, the increase of the bureaucratic apparatus, in other words, people who are not engaged in teaching, not the teachers, but all the hangers-on around the teaching profession in departments of education usually outpaced the enrollment of students into schools 10 to 1. In other words, we were pretty much hiring 10 bureaucrats for every student that came in. That is not sustainable. That's going to have to end. There is also plenty of new information technologies which should be very useful in aiding future of public education.
Thank you.
What a fascinating way to solve a problem is by cutting the resources available.
Or getting rid of the bureaucrats.
City of Greeley and Fort Collins and Denver are all running their water departments as enterprises, I believe. City of Greeley estimates that they'll have a $32 increase monthly for an average water customer to pay the property taxes. They're estimating $3 million to be paid in property taxes just in Larimer County. So I understand that you're looking for equity and justice in this, but how in the world can this be just to have other communities pay large property taxes on their facilities in other counties?
I live in Aurora, and our Aurora water is notoriously inefficient. And in fact, we are promised the rate increases every year for next 10 years at least. So perhaps it is time to bring about some new thinking into the area of water supplies. For example, at least 15% of Americans receive their water from private water companies. Perhaps that is what people should start thinking about it. Private water companies are always more efficient than government bureaucracies. And we simply cannot have government bureaucrats burning through dollars right and left as though there's no tomorrow.
I guess the notion of efficiency always being better in a private enterprise applies as first of all, do we know that, do you have any suggestion that those water systems are less expensive and more efficient, or simply an assertion? And I know for a fact that when you talk about private prisons, which is one of those things that we often talk about, that they're much more expensive ways. That's a much more expensive way to deal with the needs of prisoners. This notion that the public, this is clearly born from some deep-seated personal animosity toward the public sector, toward our community and common investments. To say with such certainty that always something is anyway, I really struggle with that. I have yet to find an absolute in my life. And certainly when it comes to efficiencies and what's the most effective way to do it, again, bottom line, we're going to be taking the money away from water systems and forcing increases in water bills. And maybe that's the efficiency that Greg is looking for. It's not one that makes me particularly comfortable.
We're going to need to...
If I could just mention,
Okay.
I don't have any personal animosity. It's simply common sense that a private market have always functioned better than government. We can look at Soviet Union, Eastern Europe, North Korea, and we can compare it to countries of Western Europe, United States, Canada. These have always been countries that functioned better because they were based on private economy rather than state-owned economy. So this is not deep animosity, nothing personal. That's just common sense, and it's several hundred years of history.
Okay. I want to move on to Amendment 61. I think we're probably just going to have time for one question here. Amendment 61 would prohibit state debt or loans of any kind and would make Colorado the only state in the nation that is prohibited from using debt to finance capital projects such as schools, higher education, buildings, and roads, and to manage cash flow needs. Greg, why would this be a beneficial fiscal policy for the state of Colorado?
Well, number one, this amendment simply restates constitutional prohibition on borrowing. State of Colorado have been prohibited since 1876 by our state constitution from engaging in any sort of debts. Number two, there have been public debt which was simply called by different names, things like certificates of participation. It's still debt, and as they say, a rose by any other name is still a rose. So it will simply put our state government into compliance with our Constitution. If there is a need for constructing any sort of large capital project, for many years, all sorts of state governments in this country have built reserves and then built things. Not allowing them to borrow things, not allowing them to borrow funds will create a great deal of savings on interests that we have to pay now, or rather, future generations end up paying for what we use today. And also, we have to realize that that borrowing is nothing more than a deferred taxation. We're still going to have to pay it off. It's not like money comes from somewhere that we don't have to pay it. We're simply borrowing today, and we will have to tax ourselves in the future and pay it off.
Carol, would you like to respond?
Just as the private sector uses debt financing as a way to spread the cost of a particular product over the useful life of an investment, that's exactly what Colorado state government has done with voter approval in the past when we've invested in big capital projects. This idea that we can't, that all debt is prohibited by the Constitution is a fascinating interpretation of the language on the prohibition against general obligation bonds, particularly in light of the Tabor Amendment that says specifically that voters have the authority to authorize debt. And it actually goes into great detail as to what it is voters need to do in order to authorize debt. Bottom line, we're going to put Colorado at a huge disadvantage in terms of investing in the very roads and infrastructure that makes our private economy work. The estimates are that we're going to lose close to 70,000 jobs if we stop making public investments. And the beauty of a public investment is not only does it create jobs, it also creates, lo and behold, wealth, because roads and public facilities that are commonly owned by the public are in fact a form of wealth. They're the very form of wealth upon which generations depend. I was just recently out in Mancos, Colorado, and they're very proud of the fact that they have the longest running high school in the state of Colorado. It was built 107 years ago. 107 years ago, people in Mancos borrowed money to build a school that we're still benefiting from. And if Amendment 61 passes, we're going to be the generation that doesn't invest in our future and doesn't invest in the very foundations upon which we educate and we move and we transport and move goods and services for the future. We're going to put the state at a terrible disadvantage with our competitors.
We have another question from the studio audience.
Yes, I'm Richard Thompson from Fort Collins, and I think that the League has done the public a service by having both these folks here tonight to draw the issues so sharply between them, and for us to, for me, as a person who moved to Colorado just 4 years ago, I'm struck by the fact that there's a commonality of theme, that if these do pass, that there's something that Colorado is doing that's not being done elsewhere. I think the moderator, you pointed out that if this number 60 is passed, it's unlike what's been done elsewhere in the country. The enterprise zones, I'd never heard of that actually before, where you're taxing your public bodies. And for us in Fort Collins, this has a very close to home effect because Colorado State University is the heart of our economy here in many ways, and the extent to which this would be impacted negatively, if these are the cases, it's going to make Colorado still almost second from the bottom as far as our university system is concerned. So the question is, are we making Colorado unique in a way that we really don't want to?
I would argue that Colorado is unique in so many ways that is so positive. This is such a fabulous place. I would argue that we have been able to have a strong and vital economy primarily because it's such a beautiful place, in spite of the fact that we don't invest in the basic public services like public higher education. This will take us to a unique place, to a unique and I believe dangerous economic place. If businesses from around the country get to the point where they say the public sector doesn't invest, they don't invest in the public sector institutions in the state of Colorado, in their universities, in their transportation systems. I think that's really going to make us unique in a terrible way when it comes to location and expansion decisions for businesses across the country. There is this theory, I think, that low taxes is what drives location decisions. And when you actually read the analysis from economic development folks, what they say actually determines is quality of life. Those are the things that really drive where businesses locate, and those quality of life decisions are primarily driven by the quality of education, quality of outdoor activities, quality of the innovations in the communities, and those are all things that are supported by universities, by high-quality public education, and I think your question is a good one. Will this take us to a place where we're unique in a way that's not going to be good for the economy and for the people who live here? And I think the answer to that is a resounding yes.
Well, I agree with the part that Colorado is a wonderful place. As to everything else, I would disagree. I believe that the heart of the economy anywhere is a productive private sector. That is the only part of the economy that creates wealth which everybody else get to use afterwards, including the universities. So if you have lower taxes, you will unburden your private sector, you will allow it to flourish and to create a great deal of wealth that later and within a short time will allow your public sector to flourish as well. And remember, the universities use things that are produced in private sector factories and workshops. They use funds that come from taxes that come from private sector, okay? So you need private sector to flourish before anything else could happen, literally. There was a French economist, his name was Sayes. He postulated something called the Say's Law. And it's quite obvious. It says that before you consume something, you have to produce it, okay? Government does not produce things. Government is a form of consumption. Education is a form of consumption. Many things are a form of consumption. So you need to produce things before you can consume them.
I have a final question to pose to both of you. And Carol, would you please respond first? If these ballot issues pass, what will Colorado look like in 10 years?
Well, one thing we know for sure is that in 10 years, if nothing else changes, we will have substantially less dollars invested in our transportation system, which is already in serious disrepair. I would suggest that our roads will be, we'll have closer to 80% of our roads that are not, that are poor and or mediocre, and will mean higher investments for individuals in terms of taking care of their cars and longer time in traffic for our private sector. I believe that our school system will be looking at classrooms where there are substantially more kids. But you know, even as I say that, I find it hard to believe. I really have trouble imagining what we're going to be like. What I know is, because I can't imagine what we look like if we reduce the investments in the public sector to the extent that these measures will require. I do know that we will be known as a community that doesn't care about the private sector, that isn't willing to give a hand to the private sector so that they're going to make them pay for their own transportation needs and their own education needs. And I think that we will we'll have a lot of businesses shuttered, and the mountains will stand, but there won't be the services around them to make sure that we can enjoy them. And I don't want to, you know, it's hard to know, because it's hard to imagine that Coloradans wouldn't rise to the occasion. I just know that if these measures do pass, the next 3 or 4 years, kids in schools, businesses they're trying to start and expand are going to be in a terrible problem. It's going to be like putting us back into another recession for the next 4 or 5 years, and I see that as not a good entryway into 10 years from now.
Greg?
If these three ballot measures pass, the Colorado will have a vibrant economy. We will have a very low unemployment. We will have lots of tax revenue for our public service. The roads will be better. Our schools will be better. I agree the mountains will stand, and we will have a lot more money to go and visit those mountains and ski or hike or do whatever we like to do there. The Colorado will be a much better place to live if these three pass.
For your final comments, will you please tell our viewers what they should consider in making their decision to oppose or support these ballot issues on November 2nd? Greg, would you go first, please?
I guess we have to just restate what we've been talking about for the last hour. Imagine a hiker climbing up the mountain. When he's got a heavy backpack, it slows him down. It makes him a lot more tired. If he gets rid of some of the unneeded stuff in his backpack, he could go faster and further. That heavy backpack with lots of unneeded stuff is lots of excessive government taxation. If we were to reduce that taxation, and that hiker is a private economy, it will go farther and faster and will be less tired and will produce a great deal of goods and services and tax revenue for our public sector. It will be a much better place to live. Every state that have low rate of taxation attracts businesses, attracts jobs, attracts a great deal of arts, culture. And that is because low tax areas are a better place to live. That has been a history of mankind for thousands of years. Let's not experiment with some high taxation and that job-killing government programs. Let's cut taxes and let's stimulate our economy, and many other things will follow.
Carol, what should our viewers consider in making their decision?
I think the viewers should consider the question of what kind of a Colorado do we want to live in. Do we want to live in a Colorado where we invest in our communities, in our schools, in our public transportation systems, in our environmental protection, and quite frankly, in our private sector, by helping them have an environment where they can thrive and invest their resources in the things that they need to do for their competitive edge, and leave those things like transportation and those public goods to a public sector so that they can in fact flourish. The real question here is, what kind of a Colorado do we want? And I would ask that each of our voters take the challenge that Greg just suggested. Go look at that, his assertion that the best places to live are places where there are really low tax rates, and that's where the economies are the strongest. Because I think with a little investigation, you'll realize that is is folly. It is a dream, and it is a way of seeing the world that is consistent with an ideology that says it's all about those who can pay for it get it, and those who can't don't. Because in the end, public sector is about common investments. It's an investment of a little bit of each of ours so that we can all benefit. And remember, we're currently ranked 49th in taxation. The notion that we're trying an experiment of high taxation is just not quite based in reality. So I think the challenge is, what kind of Colorado do we want?
Thank you very much for a very informative discussion. This CrossCurrents program will be rebroadcast at various times during the month on Channel 14 in Fort Collins. Please check your local listings for exact times and dates. Copies of recent CrossCurrent programs are available for checkout from the Poudre River Library District Libraries at 201 Peterson Street and the branch at Front Range Community College at the corner of Harmony Road and Shield Street. Thank you to our panelists and to our studio and our viewing audiences.